Part 4, I'm going to start building out the fingers, and we have these knuckles coming out. We're modeling this hand for a close-up or a medium close-up, not an extreme close-up. So it's got to hold up to maybe fine art standards of doing a high-res, maybe 2 or 4K render. If we want to see where the skin is and still see through it, you know, we can hit 5 and then have the shading on X-ray. These right here are the knuckles falling over. Let's take those and we're going to extrude. So when I extrude straight out, it's going to look like this. Now it looks funny. Looks like brass knuckles or something. Now if we scale that in, still doesn't look quite right. It just looks kind of like a thickness to that. So here's actually what we're going to do them all at once. Make sure you're always checking vertex face. Make sure you don't have a little line in between here. That means you extruded twice. You can easily do that. It just happens all the time, no matter how much you model. You could select each one of these faces, and I already showed you how to extrude with keep faces not together. Remember, keep faces by default is on. Click it off. Okay, and now when we scale them, still not quite right. I'm going to teach you one other tool. Now go into the attribute editor. Don't deselect. All of them are selected. I'm going to select local scale X, Y, and Z. Hold shift so I have all these three. Middle mouse button, drag. Check it out. So they all scale at the same time. So if you have a lot of stuff coming out, like an organic thing like an octopus or something with a lot of fingers, you can extrude them at once, just like the fingers we have here, but imagine if it were detail on top of a surface like we have going on. So just rewind the video if you want to see that again. And now we have a little bit more to work with. When you hit 3, it's still all quad, but now do you see the knuckles kind of coming out here? Might be a bit exaggerated, but that's where we're going with it. Okay, back to 1, and we can do the other side, because if you look at your own hand, this side right here is a little bit padded, and we have a little bit of extra stuff here too. I'm going to swap out that back of the hand view for the palm view. I'm going to keep it exactly in place, but I hit Control A, and then we have this popping up. Remember where we darkened it? And then we have an image name. Here it says where I have that back view, and I had you take a picture of the front of your hand too. Here is the palm view, and open, and watch this, it just pops right in its place. This is where the artist's eye comes in, and just interpret the best you can. Move it as close as you can. Doesn't matter, we can always get the other hand by duplicating and reversing. This part of the hand, if you look at your hand, it pillows out a little bit more under each finger. That's a little bit of muscle and fat there. That similar thing I did before. You could extrude, keep faces together, off, go to attribute editor, select local scale X, Y, and Z, and then middle mouse button. Remember, it has to be the middle, and remember, don't click off on anything else or it's going to cause an error. So it's a little bit of a trick, but this can really save you time in modeling stuff. So now you've got the pillowy part of the palm of your hand. We can do this part too, which is, if you look at your hand, we're keeping all quads, by the way. By extruding, we're not creating any triangles, and that's good. So we're extruding this part, and looking at your right hand, that's where it really pillows out, right? Right about there. So I would select these 3 and extrude them. For these, I will keep them together. By default, keep face together on. I'm going to keep that together, and like that. So look at that. This needs a little massaging, right? Not too much, because you're in the perspective view modeling. It's a little bit dangerous. You don't know where stuff is getting pulled, but look at how that's changing. Then look at your right hand again, and look at the other pillowy part. It's kind of right here, right? So I'm going to grab this face, and this face, and extrude those out. And I'm going to keep faces together on it. I'm going to local scale X, Y, and Z inward like that, and maybe pull it up. And there's a little point right here that's trying to hide, right? Somewhere in there. There it is. Now let's turn off the image planes. We can by we see show, turn off image planes, and just look at our object so far. I know it looks goofy, but if this were made of clay, we're getting all the clay in the right place to be able to sculpt that right. So it has a good mechanical topology, and it's going to fall right into texture really well. When you do the 1-3 test, it shouldn't distort terribly, and if it's caving in this more than like 5%, that does indicate, well, you need a edge there to brace it in like that. This is what I'm expecting that you have on the hand. It's just up to the wrist, whatever you took a photograph. You don't have to do your arm yet. You just cut it off right below the end of the hand and the top of the wrist. This is pretty much where we're going. Our next step would be, modeling out the fingers. We're going to be in the next video using the B tool for the soft brush, smoothing that, hitting B, and getting more sculpted. Okay, part 5. If you haven't saved, long time enough to save it, but before we are going to get rid of all these inputs. That's also what causes crashes. All the stuff we haven't got rid of, that construction history, each step done since the beginning of time here. I have these delete by type history, and all that will go away, and then just save this as my hand model 4. We have the image planes there still. They're just hidden. I'll pop them back up under show image planes. I have the palm of the hand, and if I want, I can switch that around with the other image here stored, and you should have stored the back of the hand, so that flips around, so you have both. I'm suggesting that you get more detail in the palm of the hand and the back of the hand before the fingers, because it's easier to model simple to complex in chunks at a time. That's when you're modeling a character. You model the head, you spend time, and then separately model the body, and you can connect the two. Or say you're doing a realistic character with an ear. It's better to model the ear separately and then attach it to a complex head, because all those things on top of each other, it would be a nightmare. It would be a bird's nest of edges and CVs. And if I just move faces around and hit B, you can see how you can push and pull, hold B down to sculpt the size of areas if I want that bigger. Let's turn off the grid right there, so we're really just concentrating on our work, and maybe turn off B. This is the intuitive part. Just thinking, even rotating it a little bit. Not too much. You shouldn't be going crazy. And always check with 1. What shouldn't be is something that looks like that. It's really pinching or close. Remember that rule of thumb, no pun intended there. Between 3 and 1, it should be only, I would say, a 5% difference in shape to 10% at most. If it's radically different in shape when you do the 1-3 test, that means you don't have enough edges. So always go back. Don't live in this view because it looks better and more smooth, because what's true is 1. Those are really one-to-one connections. That's what's really happening in your polygon. And we have all quad because we only started out with squares, and we're extruding edges one at a time to make a new square, or we're extruding faces only. We're not going in there cutting or repairing anything. I didn't show you too many tools to really get in too much trouble to add errors to it yet. So strategy is just to show you a few. All right, that does need some work, and it needs some polishing here or there. Every one of your hands are going to look different, just like your hands really are. Think of it as a portrait. Everything we model, we want to really look at it. That's why I had you bring those objects in and really look at them and see what ordinarily is missed. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time in modeling this. Actually, I'm just going to hit pause, and then I'm going to cut back to it. Okay, coming back just for a minute. Looking in the side view, we hadn't looked there for a while, and we're certainly too distorted here. It's getting too fat, so I'm going to bring this over, and because I did some pretty good sculpting, not great, but okay, some sculpting in the front view, I don't want to destroy that. So I'm using B, just hit B, you get the heat, that part which moves it softly. It's called soft modification. Certainly we don't want to start bringing points in harshly, so we're just gently nudging stuff, trying to keep what we had. And you can forget about just absolutely lining up with your reference, right? You just have too many lines here, and just imagine if you're doing a face. It's just going to get real complex fast. So you're doing artistic compromises, something like that. So I just want to show a little bit more in the side view, and then I'm going to work on it more. So I'm going to pause it in a second. Let's see where that edge is. Oh yeah, so it's a little more in, like that. Let's see what's going on. That's better. Let's turn off the image plane so you can see through it. It needs a lot more. It's too lumpy still, and it needs a lot more sculpting in here. So I'm going to be working on that. I'm going to pause it. Okay, coming back, I just worked on this only maybe 5 more minutes to add a little more contour here. You could see I brought these extra extruded parts closer together and fanned them out a bit. If you can compare with before, these were very blocky, but I'm using every line and every vertex, trying to use few as possible to get the shape I need, but I think I have enough, and we're trying to get as low as possible to make the shape, to be really efficient modelers, and it also will make you fast, because if you don't have too many points to move, too many CVs or stuff to jog around, modifications and everything, it's just going to go faster and faster. So it's probably easier at this time to look at your own hand rather than, you know, facing reference, because looking at your own right hand, this part here is going to pillow up a bit, you know, right there if you're looking at your right hand right now. And I'm going to take away the soft modification, and this part will pillow out a little bit more. Maybe that's a little bit too big, just scaling it. And again, I'm not following any recipe or formula, I'm just following what the shape so far needs based on the image. It's just like making a 3D portrait or 3D painting of where you started with the image foundation, and that's how we're going with it. You can imagine it looks like a hand with that little extra cleft there, and we don't seem to need too much more. Now we hit 1 and we could see we're pushing it, right? That I wanted to put down for a crease. We're kind of pushing it to the max of what we can do for an overlay. So I wouldn't put that over the edge, or we'll need something else. You also see where these are crossing each other. That's not good. And for texturing, when we do UV layout, the UV layout would be compromised, it would be tangled. So you do want to switch back from 1 to 3 to make sure you're not too different. As I said, levels of difference between those two are getting a little bit too much. And you can hit the arrows to, if you can't grab a key, you see how I'm jumping? I'm not clicking, so I'm just using the arrow keys, and I'm jumping to the next one by hitting the left arrow key, and that truly is 1 there. So that's a really stretched right here. It's really pushing it to, and if you have to push it anymore, what it's telling you is you better insert an edge. I'm trying to avoid it, so I think I can get away with it. It's getting rather distorted. We're on the light side of modeling, but we're trying to get the most out, the most realism out of the fewest lines. Just untangle them a little bit more. That's a little bit more healthy in terms of shape. And then we can hit 3. We still get a little bit of that edge, still okay. So it's a tug of war between that, you know, if you want. If that's just not going to do, it's just going to be too tangled, the only thing we could have to do to fix it is insert a line right there. Okay. Now we're trying to avoid that, just to say, okay, can we have less edges, less faces, etc. Just trying to get you in good habits there, but it's no big deal if you wanted to add a line there. But if we did add a line there, like right here, then we'd have more to work with. We could really bring this down a little bit. See how it's gathering up here? Oops. It's gathering up here, right? Like it didn't before. That's because that line is there. It's very rubbery. It's adding tension. That is optional. There's no limit, but if you do work for a game company, they may say you have this amount of faces or vertices to work with, or polygons to work with, and you have to stay within that. So you have to be flexible enough to get the look you want with the fewest amount of lines. So you get the idea. All right, I'm going to end it there for the sculpting part before we can start extruding in proper fingers. I'm going to stop there. Now part 6, we're going to build out the fingers here. That's the minimal sculpting we have so far. We can tweak this a little bit as we go, but we have a little bit more naturalism with pads of fat just built out as extruded faces since the last time, in the knuckles. And the rest, any detail we could easily emulate with bump maps or normal maps, which we'll get into later, the different kinds of texture mapping. That's not just color, there's other types that we'll really see to bring some tactility and realism out of the surfaces. But at this point, we're going to build out the fingers. And in this workflow, it's going to make a lot of sense to keep it simple to complex in chunks, like I mentioned before. Okay, we're going to bring our image planes back. If you're not catching that under show and all these items, image planes were hidden. Sometimes they're blocking in the way. Just turn them off. Yeah, you could put them on a layer too over here if you want, or you could go here, whatever your preference. I'm going here, we're going close to where the fingers are sprouting out, and I'm turning off B and trying to really just focus as it's getting messy. So I extruded sort of a stub for each finger and just insert maybe one more right there. Oops, not there. There. Let's see what I'm doing. There. Really artistically, not scientifically. And that gives that look. Can you see how there's more of a, I don't want to say softer, but actually a more supported webbing there between the fingers. That's going to be stronger when if you have to do a medium close-up and animate this, it's not going to break here. It's got more support. Okay, now I'm going to extrude. If I want, I could extrude them at the same time. And go up with that. Make sure I don't have any of the back sides or anything selected like that. Oops, that would cause a problem. So Control, Shift Select to deselect a face you didn't want. Of course, you know all that. Shift click to select multiple faces, and working in the front view, I'm going to go all the way up. Just going to want a way to work like that. Then I'm going to move into place like this, and kind of like a big blocky sculpture of just like hacking it into place. All right, then I could recommend to stop there and then look in the side view and correct for that. Now, when you posed your hands, I had you curl your fingers just a little bit. In this one, it's a little bit curled. Probably should have been a little bit more because I wanted to match both the natural position of the fingers when relaxed, yet also the ability to put a skeleton in there at some point. So everything I teach you how to model, I want you to learn how to model of the correct topology, but also model something that is ready for animation. And to be ready for animation means it needs to be slightly splayed. Splayed meaning the fingers are separated and not together, and there is an extension to the fingers and the thumb, that you have distance between each digit. That will make it easier to put in a skeleton later when it becomes time to rig something in order to animate it. That's why you've seen the characters in the T pose to get the arms and legs splayed so a skeleton can be put in. So this one is splayed, but it's a little bit more outstretched than how you posed your fingers, and it's not really a big deal. So all I'm doing is trying to get the general curve of the fingers right here now in the side view, and matching that in the front view. And again, it's going to be some type of a compromise from front and side, and then you just have to go by looks later. Okay, that's probably good enough. And this different strategy of extrusion, maybe you haven't tried before, is extending really long like this, and now going in and you're going to place edge loops in key locations. Now, what I'm looking for is to put an edge loop at the bone, the digit where they're joining together. Because if this hand had bones in it, that is rigged joints, it would need to bend here and here like a real hand. So we want to make sure we have enough support for that in the edges. So for a realistic hand, you probably have 3. For a cartoon hand, you would have far less. But we're aiming to the realistic. So we're going to do 3 at these digits, and it's going to, I'm eyeballing it again, being sort of organic, naturalistic, rather than scientific. You know, maybe this will be a little higher. And it's adding a lot of complication to it as we go. So before I put in the other ones, this is going to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to go in and maybe select just those. And it's hard to see what I'm doing here, but what I'm doing is putting a slight bend like that. Slight. And then I'm going to the middle and putting it slightly back. Why am I doing that? Even if the fingers are straight splayed, you want a little bit of relaxation on it, so it follows the curve just a bit. You'll probably see why better later, but that's my recommendation. Not to have them absolutely straight, just to have a slight bend to them. It's going to help later if this hand were animated. Okay, that's cool. Now we have this middle knuckle here, and you do the same. We're going in. I recommend using that one we already created as the bottom of the 3 and going 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2. My recommendation is maybe move this one up a little bit more. Of course, your mesh will be different, but I'm just talking on my mesh. Something like that. All right, back to the insert loop tool, and I'm going to go like that, and I think I'm going to bring this one down too. I can get the whole ring by choosing the arrow. That's the right arrow after you click on the edge, and it'll select the whole ring. If you want to do that, you probably already know that. Okay, and then one more for that knuckle. Oops, coming down like that, and maybe like that. So they're really different from one another. Again, the distances all of here are different, so you're inserting a lot of naturalism into it, which does affect later down the road. These little things tend to accumulate to add more imperfection, and that's what we're kind of going for once we really understand the tools, is to model more naturally, to look more natural. You go by this symmetry and all the things that happen in nature, but then nature is imperfect and everyone's an individual and looks slightly different. And that's what we're doing artistically when we're adding just our own intuitive clicks and looking at different views to see how that is going a little bit off the norm, or let's say off the mathematical, perfect architectural look for it. So as you can see, I'm doing the same thing with these groups of 3 that I did with the top knuckle. So again, you're creating areas, concentrated areas of edges where if and when it bends, it's not going to tear here, and it has enough edges and CVs to work well. Last thing I'm going to do at the tip, let's do a 1-3 test. You see, it's not bad, but it's caving in a little bit here. And yep, the fingers do look like one of those latex gloves, which of course you're going to sculpt more, and I'll do that in the next video. But what we do see with the 1-3 test is this rounding out too much. It's caving in. We're going to talk about the nails later too, so let's wait for that. And the next one will also do the thumb, so don't worry about that now. So what we really should do is extend this a little bit further, the top, maybe like that, because the fingers look a little short, like that. Then, remember how we did this to the bottom of the wrist because it kept caving in? That is, we inserted another line. We see this a little better here. You can see it right here. It got really, let's call it organicized, right? So all these lines look a lot more lazy and silky, even though it's keeping that quad topology, because we're getting more and more organic as we go. Anyway, you see that line right there. That really kept the bottom edge, I'll highlight it so you can see it, from caving in at the bottom. So we're going to insert an edge similarly here. A lot of students do, like, they insert an edge right there. That's too tight. Right there's the sweet spot for the edge. It's relative to the overall size and shape of it, but when you insert an edge, you don't want to go right there. That's ridiculously close. It's right here. And you'll get a sensitivity and a feeling for that as you model. And then let's test it again with the 1-3 test. Okay, so it's not as pointy anymore. Definitely needs sculpting, as it looks kind of funny in the side view or flat. Also, we're going to sculpt out the thumb, so I'm going to stop it there.